I never thought my 32-year journey would end with a meeting that lasted less than 10 minutes. That morning, I arrived at the company as usual, coffee in hand, walking at my usual steady pace through the 10th floor hallway, a corridor I had helped design, build, and maintain nearly down to every screw in the internal security system. No one greeted me as they usually did. Something felt off, but I brushed it aside. In a large organization, feeling invisible from time to time is part of the deal. But that morning, the coldness in a few colleagues' eyes made me shiver just slightly. As I placed my briefcase on the desk, an internal email popped up. Please report to meeting room 3, floor 129:00 a.m. Peter Rawlings, CEO. Peter Rawlings, the new CEO appointed less than 2 months ago. A young former executive from a Swedish tech giant. Rumors said he had been brought in to revolutionize the company's structure. Sharp mind, flat tone, and eyes that never quite registered emotion. I'd met him once during a technical board meeting. His handshake was brief and impersonal, as if afraid to linger too long with someone from the old era. I walked into the meeting room at exactly 9 o'clock. Peter was already the Reno assistant, no secretary, just a laptop open in front of him. He didn't look up as I pulled out the chair. "Good morning, Mr. Beckett," he began, eyes still fixed on his screen. "Thank you for being on time." I said nothing. I'd been in meetings like this before, but instinct told me this one was different. Peter typed a few keys, then finally looked up. "We're conducting a management restructure. The company needs to streamline and modernize operations." He paused, like reading off a dusty script. "Regrettably, your position has been eliminated." No eye contact.
No emotion.
Just a corporate announcement delivered by someone who knew nothing about the history embedded in that room. I inhaled deeply. Images flashed in my mind, those overnight shifts in 1998 when the entire data center shut down due to permission errors. The time in 2007 when a virus infiltrated the system via an unencrypted USB, and I stopped it in 17 minutes. The young colleague who was nearly fired for a breach, until I proved it was a firmware update issue, not his fault. But I only smiled faintly. "Thank you for the opportunity to serve here for over 3 decades, I said as I stood, pulling my briefcase toward me. Peter gave a small nod, as if checking off a task from his Monday morning to-do list. I left the room and walked back downstairs like a man perfectly at peace. I didn't feel anger. I didn't cry. I wasn't outraged. I knew this day would come, I just hadn't expected it to arrive right before the milestone I had looked forward to for years. A quiet retirement with a respectful farewell. I returned to my office. Everything was just as I'd left, a technical diagram still pinned to the walls, the paper model of the core network system I'd built back in 2012, and the special USB I always kept in the right-hand drawer. I packed up slowly in silence, piece by piece.
No rush.
On the way home, I didn't tell my wife the full story. I simply said, "I'm retiring a little earlier than planned. Maybe it's finally time to tend to that garden you love." She smiled softly, didn't ask for more. But what Peter Rawlings didn't know was that I never left empty-handed. I didn't take data. I didn't download anything. I didn't need to. Because I was the architect of the company's entire system foundation. Every line of code, every access route, every security layer designed by me. And buried deep within that system's core, I had left something untouched. A farewell message. One they would never forget. I returned to the office after that fateful meeting, and no one even bothered to look up. Everyone in the room seemed to already know or had guessed what had happened. The air was thick with an uncomfortable silence. A few eyes flicked toward me, only to quickly turn away, as if afraid of being associated. I didn't blame them. In an environment where someone could disappear after a single email, silence becomes a survival instinct. I opened my desk drawer and pulled out an old wooden box I had kept there since my first year with the company. Inside were a few personal items, a photo of my daughter on her graduation day, a Montblanc fountain pen gifted to me on my 20th work anniversary, and a small black USB drive marked with a red ribbon. No one knew what it meant. To them, it was just some miscellaneous gadget. But to me, it was a key, not just a technological one, but a symbol of pride, intellect, and the silent craftsmanship I had poured into my work for over 3 decades. I placed the pen on top of the box and closed it gently, like completing a quiet ritual. All critical documents had been handed over long ago. Everything I'd built had supposedly been left behind her, so they thought. There's one rule I've followed throughout my career. Never create anything you can't control, and never let anyone else control what you've created unless you're ready. To me, work was never just about delivering results. It was about ensuring the entire system ran with the precision of a Swiss timepiece even in the most urgent of crises. Back in 2003, after an internal ransomware attack nearly wiped the entire accounting system, I began designing an extra layer of security never documented in any manual. We called it the Ghost Protocol, a covert fallback authentication system, buried deep beneath the main admin interface. Only I knew how to activate it, disable it, and recover it in the event of a breach, or like now when leadership became reckless. I never intended to trigger it. Not unless forced. But something about Peter Rawlings's indifferent gaze made it impossible to walk away quietly. He didn't fire me because I was no longer needed. He fired me because he couldn't recognize the invisible loyalty that lives between a person and the system they've nurtured for decades. I plugged the USB into my computer one last time. A command line interface appeared, no colors, no animations, just the raw, dry syntax of purpose. I typed in a 128-character passcode decrypted from my daughter's birth date, the year I joined the company, and the employee ID of the first junior engineer I ever mentored. The screen blinked once, then went dark. That was it. There were no signs anything had happened. But I knew. The secondary security layer had been activated. No one would be able to operate the core system without passing through Ghost Protocol authentication. I removed the USB, slid it into my jacket pocket, and stood up. Before leaving, I glanced around the office one last time. Behind my desk, the whiteboard still held the network map I once sketched in dry erase marker, a diagram that later became the official blueprint for the entire corporation. A few of the new hires thought it was abstract art. I smiled softly, just enough for myself to feel it. 32 years isn't just time, I thought. It's the blueprint of existence. Out in the hallway, a young employee, the engineer I once taught how to write a script to detect fake logs, looked up. His gaze was uncertain, hesitating to speak. I gave him a small nod, a quiet farewell. He nodded back respectfully. I took the elevator to the ground floor, past the reception desk, where a young intern was still glued to her phone. She glanced up briefly, then turned away. The world never stops for one person's departure. But sometimes, if that person leaves the right way, they can make the whole world pause just for a moment. And I knew that moment was coming. I never returned to the office after that day. No calls. No messages from HR. Everything unfolded just the way they wanted it, Tokyo, quick, and without a trace. But what they didn't know was that I was still watching, not out of revenge, but because I understood that system better than anyone else. And I knew that without a gatekeeper, sooner or later, the gate would fall. 3 weeks had passed since I left the company. I spent my mornings in peace with a cup of hot coffee, tending the garden, reading old technical manuals I'd never had the time to touch. My wife said she'd never seen me this calm, and perhaps she was right. But each evening, I still turned on my computer and monitored the system through an encrypted secondary channel. Not to interfere, but to ensure I could, if needed. You could call it workaholism or post-retirement syndrome. But the truth is, it was responsibility. I hadn't built that system just for a paycheck. I'd built it like a carpenter builds the home he plans to live in for the rest of his life. In the beginning, everything seemed to run fine. No critical alerts. Everything stayed within expected parameters. But in the 4th week, I noticed a small change, a new script added to the internal access control chain. On the surface, it looked like a performance update, shortening token authentication time for senior management. But when I tracked the packets moving through port 443, I noticed a suspicious connection encrypted using a proprietary algorithm, not aligned with the ISO standard security framework I had implemented. That meant one thing. Someone had added a backdoor for remote access without going through the cybersecurity team. They used custom encryption to avoid detection. They were either recklessly naive or deliberately opening a breach. I sighed. Peter Rawlings clearly had no idea what he was doing, or worse, he was being manipulated. The next day, I received an email from an unknown address. But I recognized the encryption style in the subject line. It was the kind Elena and I had used for years when sending internal data over our private VPN. The system's being breached. Is Ghost Protocol still active? I nodded to myself. Elena had always been the only person I trusted completely during my 32 years of service. She had once declined a promotion just to stay in the engineering floor because, in her words, it's where people still think like us. I reopened the Ghost Protocol interface for the first time since I'd left. An alert popped up immediately. 3 unauthorized admin-level access attempts in the past 24 hours. All blocked. But without my hidden layer of protection, they would have slipped right through. And the worst part? No one at the company even knew it was happening. I stared at the screen thinking, I could contact them, report it, send a full technical brief with recommended action steps. But I knew they'd either ignore it or worse, accuse me of industrial espionage by a former employee. I needed a reason to return, one strong enough to make them listen. Not to ask for my job back, but to make a point. Without a true gatekeeper, the whole system was going to collapse. That evening, Elena and I met at a small cafe by the lake. She gave a faint smile when she saw I still carried the black USB in my jacket pocket. Peter thinks he can replace the entire engineering staff in 3 months, she said. They're redesigning the admin interface, integrating AI for security monitoring. But in reality, no one wants to take responsibility for what they're rebuilding. I nodded. And Ghost Protocol is still doing its job. Just as we expected. She looked at me. Are you going to go back? I didn't answer right away. I looked out over the windless lake, where the city lights shimmered faintly across the surface, and remembered something my father told me back when I was just a boy learning electronics. You can fix machines, son. But if the one operating them doesn't understand sooner or later, it'll break. I pulled a letter from my pocket. Inside was a proposal brief, direct. Emergency consultation, system-level security restoration. Condition: full authority.
No interference.
Elena gave a soft chuckle. I'll put it on Rawlings' desk first thing tomorrow. I took a sip of my coffee, then said quietly, the game's begun. And this time, I don't need a title to make them pay attention. 2 days after Elena sent the proposal, I got a video call from an unknown number. When I answered, Peter Rawlings' face appeared. His first since the day he fired me. This time, his eyes weren't cold. They were tense. Behind him, I could see people rushing around a conference room, laptops open, phones pressed to ears. A digital board behind him flashed rows of red status alerts. System errors, offline servers, denied queries, repeated login failures. We need you to come back. Immediately, Peter said, no preamble. I kept my tone calm. What changed your mind? I thought I no longer aligned with your future vision. He paused for a few seconds. I was wrong. We overestimated our ability to replace everything with younger teams and newer systems. But it turns out the company can't function without the old foundation. It was a short sentence, but I knew he had swallowed a mountain of pride to say it. I didn't feel vindicated, just disappointed. Disappointed that arrogance had led them to gamble with a critical infrastructure just to flex control. I'll come back, I said. But not as an employee. I'm an independent consultant, with full authority over this emergency. Neither you nor upper management can interfere with any technical decision I make. Peter nodded immediately. Agreed. A temporary contract will be sent today. Just help us salvage what's left. I walked back into the building for the first time in nearly a month. Everything felt both unfamiliar and familiar-like. A seasoned carpenter returning to his old workshop after the apprentices had botched every blueprint. Every I followed meant it with indifference this time, but with hope and fear. Elena met me at the engineering level. She handed me a new emergency access card, issued solely for this mission. What's the current status? I asked as I powered up. The entire access control system has failed. Accounting servers are locked. CRM is inaccessible remotely. And we think the AI-based command system has been compromised. Everything is falling apart. I inserted the black USB into a specialized port on the internal server. The Ghost Protocol interface appeared instantly, and within 3 minutes, I pinpointed the breach. Malicious code embedded in the latest AI update, provided by a third-party vendor. What made it worse? Peter had approved the AI integration himself, bypassing internal security protocols. The malware was embedded in the response script, allowing remote shell access at admin level. From there, they took over core permissions, I explained. What do they want? Elena asked. Not sure yet, but it looks like they're extracting customer data, encrypting it in chunks, and sending it out via disguised VPN tunnels. I ran an emergency override, cutting off all external interfaces. The system was instantly isolated. All peripheral devices lost internet access. Peter appeared moments later, pale. Why did you shut down the entire system? We can't afford more downtime. I held up a hand. You lost control the moment you approved an AI vendor without proper vetting. If I hadn't shut it down, every financial record your customers have would be gone. Can you explain that to the global board? He stepped back, silent. I worked nonstop for 16 hours with a small trusted team. One by one, we restored system modules. We decrypted the stolen data using a fail-safe protocol I had written years ago. We regained command authority and disabled all AI external access points. When I typed the final command to bring the system back to stable operational mode, the clock read 3:14 a.m. The control room erupted in quiet applause and collective relief. I leaned back in my chair, eyes closed, savoring that fleeting moment of peace. An hour later, Peter approached with a new contract triple my former salary, and a formal invitation to return as Global Director of Security. I didn't look at it. I simply smiled. I'm about to retire. I've spent my life planning for this. Don't ask me to come back just because others failed to protect what they were given. I stood, pocketed the black USB, and added, I didn't return for a job. I came to teach you a lesson. Peter bowed his head. And I've learned it. Thank you, Mr. Beckett. I nodded, then walked out of that building for the second time. And the last. 3 days after the system stabilized, I left the building quietly for the last time. Or so I thought. I had taken the back stairwell just as I had always preferred for the past 3 decades.
No fanfare.
No send-off. I had fulfilled my role. I had done my duty as a gatekeeper.
No resentment.
No desire for recognition. Just an old man walking away in silence. But the name Beckett was no longer a ghost behind the system. It had just saved the entire corporation from a data breach that could have evaporated hundreds of millions in shareholder value. And yet, the very next morning I received another call. This time it wasn't from Peter. Not from Elena. But from the North America Executive Board, the people I had never met directly, but whose strategic decisions had shaped most of the policies I followed throughout my career. The voice on the other end was seasoned, composed, and to the point. Mr. Beckett, this is David Lang from the Executive Council. We've read the report. And I must say, without you, this company would have lost half its soul. I didn't react. I didn't need belated praise. David continued. We know you're about to retire. We're not calling to keep you on full-time. We're calling to offer you something different. No office. No daily reports. We want you to do exactly what you've always done: protect, advise, and if necessary, warn us when we start repeating our mistakes. I was silent for a moment. There was something in his tone that felt genuine. He didn't sound like Peter Rawlings or the younger execs trying to prove themselves. David understood that knowledge can't be replaced by software. What kind of position? I asked. Mentor, intelligence architect. No staff. No department. But full access to evaluate system integrity and cybersecurity whenever you see fit. I sat up straighter. I'd never heard of that title, likely invented just to keep me involved. But it didn't sound like a trap. It sounded like acknowledgement. They'd learned their lesson. And I can step away at any time? Immediately if you wish. It's a consulting on-demand role only when you feel it's necessary to speak up. I chuckled. An invisible position. Like the ghost of the system. Exactly, David said. The ghost of the system. I didn't accept immediately. I told him I'd need time to think. He agreed. But as I hung up, I already knew I'd say yes. Not for money. Not for status. But because some part of me hadn't left. Some part of me still lived in the code, the security layers, the silent midnight logins that shaped critical operations. I thought back to the night before my first promotion in 1998. Sitting alone in the dimly lit data center, the blink of blue and red LEDs casting quiet rhythm in the room. The system was rudimentary back then, but I felt like I was holding the heartbeat of something alive. That feeling of being unseen but vital had never really left me. That night I called Elena. She answered on the third ring. "Let me guess, the V asked you back?" she said, half joking. "This time under a new title," I replied. "Mentor Intelligence Architect."
Elena Laugued.
Sounds like someone out of a Bond movie. I think they made it up just to make me feel special. "So, will you take it?" I looked out the window. It was raining, a soft, steady rain, like it was washing away the dust of time. "Maybe. But I won't work like before. I'll only show up when they forget the basics." "And they will," Elena said confidently. I smiled. "Then I guess I still have work to do." The next day, I signed the agreement electronically. A short PDF with simple terms. Full system access. Indefinite term. Right to withdraw at any time. Strategic consulting when requested or when deemed necessary. I sent it back with no message. They'd understand. And from that day on, I was no longer Engineer Beckett. I became the shadow, the unnamed gatekeeper. The one everyone needs. But no one dares to mention. Until everything starts to fall apart. I never trusted contracts full of legal jargon and tangled clauses. But this one was different, eerily simple. Just 4 pages.
No KPIs, no time commitments, no mandator meetings.
Only one line made me smile genuinely. Consultation is to be conducted at Mr. Beckett's discretion. No authority may deny his involvement when a threat is identified. I knew then they understood. This wasn't just a polite invitation or a token title. It was an unspoken pact. We will listen because we no longer have the luxury of not doing so. As soon as the contract was signed, I received a direct email from David Lang, the same man who had called me before. "Welcome back, gatekeeper. Let us know when it's time to change course." I archived that email in a folder labeled Mentor Brzezinski, name of a quiet initiative I'd been planning ever since I was first let go. A discreet advisory network of veteran cybersecurity engineers.
No departments. No org charts.
We only surface when crisis hits. I had once been discarded without ceremony after 32 years of service, cast aside by a young CEO who didn't understand the system he was supposed to lead. I couldn't let that happen again. Not just to me, but to the countless others quietly maintaining the technological lungs of the modern world. 3 weeks later, the central system flagged anomalies from an Asia-based branch, one of the company's newest international expansions. Strange file encryptions. Data access from foreign IPs outside of the host country. None of it was reported to the executive board. I opened my private channel, accessed the ghost node, and scanned the internal VPN structure. Just as I expected, an outsource firm had been using a shadow server to back up data. They claimed it was to improve performance, but in reality they had stepped far beyond their access rights. I submitted a short, direct report to the board. Within 4 hours, the regional CEO was suspended. For the first time in the company's history, they were required to publicly acknowledge a procedural failure in their internal financial report. I never revealed myself. I left only one line in the system log. Present. Issue resolved. Then something unexpected happened. Peter Rawlings, the very CEO who had once fired me, resigned. No grand announcement.
No farewell gathering.
Just a terse press release. I have decided to step away to pursue a path more aligned with my personal values. I didn't celebrate, but I felt satisfied. Because Heath, man who once dismissed me as an obsolete engineer, had finally understood. Power doesn't lie in youth or growth projections. It lies in knowing how to listen. And he'd learned that too late to apply it while he still had the title. A week later, I received a handwritten letter from him. In fountain pen, carefully composed. "Mr. Beckett, I owe you an apology. But more than that, I owe myself a lesson. Thank you for not seeking revenge, but for stepping in at the right moment. If I ever lead another organization, I can only hope to have a gatekeeper like you by my side." With respect, Peter Rawlings. I folded the letter and placed it in the same drawer as my black USB. Both were proof of things that need no spotlight, reminders that real strength lives in silence. I began to understand. This new role wasn't just a job. It was a moral contract. I started meeting with other veteran engineers, those who had been laid off for being outdated, replaced by algorithms or overconfident younger hires. I invited them into MentorBridge. They weren't coaches. They weren't influencers. They were the living memory of the system, people who understood the undocumented parts of infrastructure. We didn't take salaries. We didn't have nameplates. But whenever a major global breach occurred, MentorBridge received the first alert. And there was one final clause I asked to be added to my contract, though it was just a single sentence. Right to resign at any time without explanation. They agreed without hesitation. But the truth was, I had no plans to invoke it soon. Not because I needed the money. Not because I wanted the role. But because now I was doing something more meaningful than any title or paycheck could offer. I was passing down something the industry is forgetting. Loyalty to the system. Integrity before data. And a deep understanding of what must never fall into the wrong hands. I always knew this day would come, the day I shut down the system I once built. Not because of failure. Not due to crisis. But simply because I knew it was time. 3 months after MentorBridge officially launched, we had resolved 6 data breaches, thwarted 2 insider attacks, and neutralized a critical vulnerability in the payment system at our European HQ. No one outside the executive board knew we existed. And just as we'd planned it would stay that way, I began handing off core documentation to 3 chosen successors, young, patient, and humble enough to listen. They weren't prodigies, but I didn't need prodigies. I needed people who understood that no matter how intelligent a system becomes, it will always need someone who knows how it breaks, not from theory, but from lived instinct and battlefield experience. I wrote a handwritten letter, sealed it in an envelope labeled, "Open only in emergency." Inside was a shutdown protocol. The final command that could terminate the ghost protocol entirely, only to be used if the system spiraled beyond control. I hoped it would never be needed. But it had to exist. A reminder that no system should live forever if it no longer serves people. One autumn afternoon, as the last sunlight spilled diagonally across the wooden floor of my small home office, I logged in for the final time. The familiar interface appeared unchanged. But I knew this would be the last time I'd see it. I entered the Ghost Node console and typed the command to revoke my own access. The screen prompted, "Are you sure you want to delete all access for the current user? This action cannot be undone." I typed, Y. And just like that, the control interfaces vanished. No more access. No more touch points. The code I had written with the sum of my life's work no longer responded to me. I leaned back in my chair. A strange calm washed over me, like a part of my soul had completed a journey that began 32 years ago. A few minutes later, my phone buzzed. It was Elena. "What did you just do?" she asked, half shocked, half suspicious. "I stepped back," I said gently. "I've finished. Now it's time for others to step up. Don't you think you should stay a little longer? We still have some unresolved vulnerabilities." I smiled. "Elena, I've been here long enough to know one truth. There will always be vulnerabilities. But the worst threat isn't malware, it's human complacency. If I stay forever, no one learns to stand on their own." She was quiet for a moment, then softly said, "I understand. Thank you for carrying us through the worst of it." That night, I took a walk along the river, where city lights shimmered across the water's surface. I felt small but never useless. I had stepped away not in regret, but in fulfillment. There was no farewell party. No flowers. No speeches. But I didn't need any of that. Because I had received the greatest reward of all. Witnessing the system I built hold firm, seeing the next generation rise, and knowing that if ever the world needed it again, MentorBridge would awaken. I recalled a line from an old notebook I wrote in 1995. "The best gatekeeper isn't the one who blocks every intrusion, but the one who makes the world forget the door was ever locked." I chuckled quietly, then turned back toward home. And somewhere, deep in a hidden company server, a line of silent code still runs. No one sees it. No one knows who wrote it. But if one day everything falters, it will remind the world of a man, the final gatekeeper, who left behind a key, not to return, but so they can open the door when the time is right.